We all live in a culture, but what makes a culture? How does culture influence our decisions? These questions made me consider the overall impact of culture from person to person because I live in a culture, but is mine different than yours? As I reflected on my culture, I began to wonder about the culture of my boyfriend Jeremy. While we live together and spend most of our time together, does he have a different culture than me? Culture had a different meaning for him. As a child, he went to church every Sunday with his grandparents, which gave him a sense of religious culture. From his time spent in church, he concluded that the meaning is the beliefs and values that dictate a way of living. While I have experienced culture to have a different meaning, I was intrigued by the meaning he explained. As we discussed, the time he spent in church provided him with the belief that the origin of the world began with God, and not only did he create the world, but he also created humans. The world's origin is a similar belief, but it does not solidify the similarity of culture. He continued to explain that even though he devoted a portion of his life to religion as a child, it did not follow him into adulthood. Jeremy felt that it would be unfair to say that he participates if he does not live by Christ's word daily. Jeremy's definition of culture suggests that our cultures are identical, but I was not convinced. We began to compare the traditions and practices important to our families and whether we would pass these down to our children. He said that holidays are very important to his family, and a tradition of gathering family has become the culture around holidays. His family has more than just holiday traditions, like having a special dinner to celebrate birthdays. These traditions were once again like mine, but we did come across a difference. In his family, they practiced prayer before dinner, which was never an occurrence within mine. As we found difference in practices, this was not the last we came across. As children, we had very different experiences, especially in pop culture. He had experiences watching and playing sports, listening to music from the 90s, and playing video games. The question of cultural differences and the power of influence has begun to show. As a child, Jeremy was heavily influenced by his father to watch sports, which provoked his interest in sports. As a male, the culture of sports was present throughout his life, whether it was from pop culture or influence. As a female, there was a culture around makeup and dress up, but these differences began to beg the question, does gender play a role in cultural differences? As I examined the cultural differences in gender, he explained that the gender roles we witnessed throughout our childhoods were very similar. We both had mothers who were nurturers and homemakers, while our fathers were providers. However, I did not feel that this truly answered the question of whether gender influences culture. This led me to do some research that stated that specific gender roles are significant to each culture. The clarification determined that gender could play a different part regardless of the culture. While discussing our parental figures, the conversation led to family. Jeremy explained that family is anything or anyone that holds a level of closeness to you with an exchange of love. As he explained this, I considered what love means to him. Jeremy determined that the meaning of love is an act and care you put into another person or animal. I found from his definitions that our cultures have led us to interpret those concepts differently. The difference in interpretation was followed by differences in status within our families, where his mother held the most status and my father held the most. He provided us with knowledge on finances and advice to navigate life. The similarity in the knowledge we received could suggest that our cultures are the same. As further discussion came, we concluded that our expressions of love to non-romantic and family relationships were similar by always helping and providing advice when needed. While our expressions of love added another similarity of cultures, I found a difference in cultural elements we believe impact expressions of love. Jeremy believed that television and movies had a negative impact, whereas I believe that certain genres of music have a negative impact. Our beliefs about the basis of falling in love were also different, where he believes that it is based on attraction, personality, and similarities. As I've collected many ways that we have cultural differences, I began to find more similarities in our experiences around friendships. Jeremy stated that his friendships have been based on similar interests and personalities that have turned into sharing hobbies such as repairing motorized vehicles. With friends, Jeremy has always allowed for open communication and the ability to discuss all topics. Our culture surrounding friendships are the same. While this discussion of death and dying is difficult, we determined that traditions like funerals were the same. The expressions of grief we have individually experienced did differ. He witnessed mourning with crying, and I experienced it by sharing memories of the deceased. As Jeremy has grown, he's begun to adapt to a similar expression of grief that I have experienced, like revisiting the happier times. Our cultures have provided us with similar beliefs about death and dying, such as heaven and hell. He slightly disagrees with the view that our loved ones can watch over us in our day-to-day lives. To conclude our discussion, we discovered a final difference in our indigenous cultures. Jeremy's family is Polish, offering him expansive cuisines like kielbasa, pierogi, and pączki. His mother passed down the tradition of preparing these foods from her mother and grandmother. He expressed that he would provide the gift of their cuisine to another culture if the opportunity showed. I was fascinated to discover his indigenous culture and cuisine since I come from an Italian family. After Jeremy and I's expansive conversation, I was able to answer my initial questions about what makes culture and how it influences our decisions. Culture is made up of our experiences and influences from others. Our culture influences our differences, our decisions, based on what we have experienced. While Jeremy and I share a space, our cultural experiences and influences have given us many differences. We all come from a different culture that allows us to make decisions, but it has made us who we are.